When I was in the military and I was serving at sea, I was a sonar tech for the United States Coast Guard, did Arctic and international water patrol, and that was when I lost my faith. Now, when I say I lost my faith, I was a Taoist, so I wasn't even a Christian, but I had this faith in this sort of supernatural religion, this Taoism, and that I lost faith in it in the military. And there was a Christian evangelist who tried to convert me to Christianity, and said, "Okay, yeah, and like I'll read your Bible, since I can't." And his argument was like, "Well, if you haven't read it, how can you say that it's bad or whatever?" I'm like, "Yeah, okay, fair." I read it, and I read it and realized that that's definitely a false religion. But as soon as that happened, and I said out loud to myself in the barracks at the time, and I was like, "Yep, I'm an atheist." But immediately my question is well, then what is true? So for me, like there had to be something to replace it. And for me, the first question was, well, how do you figure out what replaces it, right? Like, how do you know? Like, you can't just jump to the next thing that makes you feel good, right? Like, that could be just as false. So how do you determine which things are true? And so that really, when I looked into how do you answer a question like that, well, the answer is philosophy. Like, it's what we developed as Western civilization, is that you sit down and you reason these things out, and then you test them. You come up with a theory and you test it and find out if it tests or if it tests out true or tests out false. And then you build your worldview that way. And so I started literally at sea in the Coast Guard, writing the book that would eventually become Sense and Goodness Without God. And the whole goal of that was not so much like what don't we believe or like why we're atheists or whatever, but rather what do we believe in? Like what do we believe about the nature of the world? What do we believe about the nature of ourselves? What do we believe about how we should be as people? So morality, politics, art, aesthetics, beauty, how do we answer all of these questions? There are answers. There's science on this. There's good philosophy on this. There's bad philosophy on it as well, but there's also good philosophy. So the question for me was, well, answer all these questions with evidence. Like, what can we back with evidence, and just build from there? And then rather than try and tell figurative stories that feel good, actually just spell out what it is that we think is true or false and test it and find out if it's true or false. And that's how you build a worldview. And we've been doing this since Aristotle. The Confucians in China, they have their own tradition doing the same thing, where they're just saying, well, we're not going to believe like oracles or revelations or holy scriptures or any of that stuff. None of that stuff's reliable. We know it's not reliable. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the world and we're going to test ideas and find out what actually tests out, and then discard what doesn't test out and keep what does. And so when you do that, you start heading in a certain direction. And you see in the Confucian tradition and you see in the Greek philosophy tradition, they actually have a similar arc. When they start doing this, they start getting towards similar answers to things. And that's highly unlikely independently of each other, right? There's separate sides of the world. And so that kind of tells you like they're heading in the right direction, and we should keep going in that direction. And which is what we did in the West, is we kept going in that direction. We hit the Enlightenment. Now we've got like modern 20th century philosophy. We're moving into 21st century philosophy. When you do this, you start to get like decent answers. Science has gotten a lot of answers and so on. And we need to trust that. We need to look at that. And you don't have to just believe anything science tells you. You can test it as well. Like sometimes science is wrong, but there's a way to test it. And it really has to be this sort of, we have to figure out first, how do we tell the difference between a true and a false story? How do we tell the difference between a true and a false idea and claim and so on? You have to answer that question first. And then once you've answered it, you can apply what you've learned to answer that question in every aspect of it. And once you're doing this, what you're doing is you're doing philosophy. You're a philosopher at this point. And I think that's what religion needs to be replaced with, is philosophy.